Life in Austria is orderly. It prides itself on its architecture and culture. Its towns and cities are clean and safe. Austria's crime rate is among the lowest in the world. Murder is rare.
It's a small country, 8 million people. Therefore, we have a very low murder rate. So in Austria, maybe 90 to 120 people a year are killed.
In 1990, a woman's body was found in Vorarlberg, Western Austria. The victim was 31-year-old Heidi Hammerer. She'd been strangled with her stockings tied in a slip knot. Five days later, 350 kilometers away, police in Graz began a murder hunt. They had found the body of Brunhilde Masser. Wolfgang Wladkowski led the murder inquiry.
Die ist in einem Wald entdeckt worden, leicht.
The body was discovered in a forest, partially buried and covered with leaves. All that we could determine was that she had been strangled with her bra.
Büstenhalter stranguliert wurde.
As they started to search for clues, another woman from Graz, Elfriede Schrempf, vanished. There were no leads, and the Graz police didn't know about the murder of Heidi Hammerer on the other side of Austria. All the women were prostitutes. Forensic scientist Manfred Hochmeister knew that meant finding the killer's DNA would be difficult.
You might find many different samples which comes from different clients of these prostitutes, and it's not easy to say which sample came from the last client who murdered the prostitute.
There was no useful DNA evidence on any of the bodies, and the separate investigations didn't realize that Austria's first serial killer had only just begun. 10,000 kilometers away in Los Angeles, the police also had a spate of prostitute murders. But for Detective Fred Miller, it was just routine.
I was with the department 30 years, and in 30 years I worked 25 of those years in homicide. So in 25 years, probably either investigated or assisted in an investigation of maybe 1,000 murders.
This investigation began with the discovery of Irene Rodriguez in downtown LA.
Looks to be about 25, 35, been strangled.
Irene was a known narcotics addict and prostitute from the area of 7th and Main. She was found underneath the rear end of an 18-wheel truck, and she had just the ligature of her bra around her neck.
In 1990, the prostitute murder rate in the United States was over 120 a year. Experience means that the police always check if anything similar has happened nearby.
At LAPD, we keep track of all the homicides and try and obtain the background information so we can put it in the database. Where the body was found it found in an alley? Was it found dumped on the street or a construction area? It might give us cause to go look at other cases and see if we think they're related.
Information on the database told Detective Miller about two other murders in the Los Angeles area. Shannon Exley and Sherry Ann Long were prostitutes. They had both been strangled with their bras and left in the open. 3 murders had happened in 15 days. Miller knew there was a serial killer at work in Los Angeles.
Just too many common denominators that we were focusing on, primarily the bra ligature that was used, the way they were transported and then dragged to a location and dropped. There were some similarities there that we thought, yes, there's possibly the same guy was responsible for all 3.
The police in Los Angeles, Vorarlberg, and Graz were all looking for a killer. They had no idea they were all looking for the same one. separate murder investigations were going on 10,000 kilometers apart. In Los Angeles, 3 prostitutes had been found strangled in 2 weeks. In Austria, 1 prostitute had been found strangled and another was missing in Graz. And prostitute Heidi Hammerer had been found strangled in Vorarlberg. Her body was the only one to leave police with any clue. Forensic scientist Walter Bruschweiler discovered that the killer may have left something behind.
Wir haben dann die Kleider von der Heidi Hammerer nach Spuren.
We checked Heidi Hammerer's clothes for traces, and we found something striking. We noticed that there were red fibers on some of her clothing, a great many of them.
Rote Fasern hafteten, und zwar in einer großen Anzahl.
The fibers didn't match anything Heidi Hammerer was wearing.
Das wurde dann zu unserer Leitfader. Das wurde zu unserem, die Faser, die uns
That was our main clue. We were looking for those fibers on all suspects' clothing.
beziehungsweise an ihren Kleidern.
But they had no suspects to compare the fibers with, and still no idea that a serial killer was on the loose. That was about to change. In 4 weeks, 4 prostitutes vanished from Vienna's streets. The police in Vienna hadn't been told about the murder investigations in Vorarlberg and Graz, but the media was reporting them. Max Edelbacher was chief of Vienna's criminal investigation department. He realized that the 7 prostitutes of Vorarlberg, Graz and Vienna might be victims of the same killer.
By newspapers we learned that there were murder cases going on in Graz and in Vorarlberg. And I remember very well when I sent my leading officer to Graz, I said, well, I have read in the newspaper in Vorarlberg is a very similar case.
The detectives from all over Austria were brought together in the country's first nationwide investigation. Austria's biggest murder hunt had finally begun. Leading the investigation was Dr. Ernst Geiger.
At the beginning, we did what every police unit does in such cases. We tried to look at the friend, the family of the victims. There were some people who were a little bit suspicious, but we didn't find an offender.
The police spoke to Rudolf Prem, whose wife Regina was one of the missing prostitutes.
She said she was going out to meet a wine dealer. Normally she would phone the house every 2 or 3 hours, but then she didn't call anymore. I took the car, but couldn't find her.
He drove to where Regina worked and spoke to her friends.
One said she had seen her briefly, but didn't know where she was. They hadn't seen her get into a car or anything. I drove around the whole night. The next day I went to the police and reported her.
Regina and Rudolf had been married for 10 years. They had a 7-year-old son.
She did everything for the child. She was there for the child 100%. If there was something wrong, she would run to him straight away. She was a good woman. There's no denying it. She used to say she would save money for the child, and then she would stop.
The police were sure Regina was another victim of the killer, but they had little evidence to go on, and the pressure was building. Astrid Wagner is a lawyer who followed the case closely.
The police were very agitated because there were quite a lot of unsolved murders in Austria at the time. Not only these murders of prostitutes, but unsolved cases of child murders too, which are still unsolved, and the police were really under pressure. People were saying that the police were incompetent and that nothing was happening.
One journalist went onto the streets of Vienna to get the prostitute side of the story. Jack Unterweger was a high-profile critic, writer and broadcaster. When he talked about crime, people listened. He made television appearances to discuss topics like criminal rehabilitation and prison reform. Unterweger wrote magazine articles about the missing prostitutes. He asked for a radio interview with Max Edelbacher to find out how the investigation was progressing.
He had a microphone and the permission to do an interview, and his topic was, how high is the fear of prostitutes in Vienna area?
Tendieren Sie mehr dazu, dass es eine Person ist, oder sind es doch unterschiedliche Fälle?
We were sitting in my room and was asking these questions about fear and do the police have any hints. This was very easy to answer because in this time we had no idea who was the murderer. Was it one murder? We had no idea.
There was little media pressure on the police in Los Angeles. Their case wasn't headline news. 3 prostitutes had been strangled with their bras in the space of just 15 days. The police knew they had a serial killer, one of 600 that American authorities deal with every year.
I suppose we could say, unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in the United States in investigating serial murder cases.
The FBI's Greg McCrary is an expert in analyzing serial killer behavior.
Serial murders are different from the more standard or traditional murders basically for one primary reason, and that is most murders are committed by people who know one another. They're not a stranger-based crime. Serial murders are typically stranger-based.
That means they're harder to solve. Fred Miller had linked the 3 prostitute murders quickly, but had little to go on.
We were really expecting there was going to be another. We just didn't know when and where. We really felt sure that with the number of murders he had committed in a short period of time, that this was just a matter of time before he showed up again.
2 of the victims, Irene Rodriguez and Shannon Exley, had last been seen near the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The police staked out the area.
Spent many hours late at night down there on 7th Street and 6th Street and to the area where those girls work. I'm hoping we'd see something. Maybe we'd see somebody, grab a prostitute and throw them in a car. We don't know. But we were just looking for something unusual. And then it just stopped. We had no idea what had happened.
And when you have a series of crimes that are connected and the killing stops, well, there's only a few explanations. Either he's in jail and he can't do it, and you haven't made the connection, he's in jail for some unrelated thing, he's dead, or he's left the area.
It would take over 6 months for the police in Los Angeles to find out the answer. In Vienna, 2 of the 4 missing prostitutes were found in woodland. Karin Eroglu and Sabine Moitzi had both been strangled with pieces of their clothing tied in a slip knot. Once more, the killer had been careful to leave no trace. He was clever and brazen. Rudolf Pram's wife, Regina, hadn't been discovered, but the killer had found Rudolf's number from her purse and called him.
He laughed, and he said that he strangled her, and her long legs were thrashing about, and she cried. He told me that on the phone. All that at 3 in the morning. I didn't believe it. At first I thought it was a hoax. I told the police, and they took a note of the details, but that was all they could do.